This video is an overview of how I obtained my mother colony through a trap out of a tree in our local neighborhood. For those who aren't familiar, a trap out is simply removing bees from an existing hive in an otherwise inaccessible location, like inside of a tree cavity or possibly inside of a wall, by setting up a funnel on the hive opening so that the bees can exit but aren't able to go back into the hive. Then you provide them an alternate location to move into, and in this case I used a swarm trap for the bees to move back into. To make the funnel, I used a 1/8 inch wire mesh, which has openings too small for the bees to fit through, so they had to go all the way through to the small end of the funnel to get out, but because they could see through the mesh, they weren't able to find their way back to the narrow entrance. I did make the entrance a little larger than it should have been, which possibly could have made it easier for the bees to find their way back in. But in this case, it worked out well for me for getting the bees to evacuate the tree, and I'll explain that in a little bit. The wire mesh was cut at the large end of the funnel and fanned out and then could be stapled to the tree. And additional pieces of mesh were used to staple around the funnel to seal any gaps. If there is any opening large enough for a bee to get around the funnel, they will find it and they will get back into the hive. Left alone, it can take up to 6 weeks for a honeybee colony to move out of a trapped out hive. In this case, the homeowner wanted the bees out as quickly as possible, so we took measures to try to encourage the bees to evacuate as soon as possible. After I set up the trap out, I left it there for about a week, and in that swarm trap box, there was some old comb with some honey in it as a welcome mat to the bees coming out of the existing hive. That week would give those bees some time to acclimate to that box so that as additional bees came out, the existing bees would signal to them that was their new location. Once the box had been there for about a week, I came back and used that larger opening in the end of the funnel to put a piece of PVC pipe down into the hive and pump smoke through that pipe into the hive. And this was a process I repeated several times. Each time I did it, a few more bees would come out of the hive, and I would let the action settle down a little bit, and then would pump some more smoke. After doing this for a couple hours, finally the entire colony had had enough, and they absconded, which simply means that they loaded up with honey and evacuated the hive altogether. When this happened, it was a pretty spectacular scene. The air was completely full of bees buzzing all around as they poured out of the hive, but eventually they all found their way to the box and started to make their way in. Throughout this process, I kept watching the funnel and the box to see if I could spot my queen as she made her way out. And eventually, as I looked at the tree just underneath the box, I found her. I captured the queen in a clip and kept her inside of the clip, but put the clip inside of the swarm trap box. By doing that, the pheromone scent of the queen would anchor the rest of the colony to that box. After dusk, when most of the foragers had returned, I took the swarm trap back home to my apiary and set it on top of the hive where I would be eventually moving the bees. Because the trap out location was only about 1.5 miles from my house, it's possible some of the foragers could have returned back to that location. So I put a bunch of branches in front of the swarm trap so that when they exited, they would be prompted to do new orientation flights and orient themselves to this location. After about a day, I took the frames from the swarm trap and put them into the hive and released my queen into the hive as well. I shook the bees from the box into the hive and then set the box in front of the hive entrance so any remaining bees would find their way in eventually. The bees acclimated quickly, seemed content in their new location, and before long they were foraging and building in the hive as usual. And the rest, as they say, is history. If you've enjoyed this video, I would sure appreciate if you give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe so you don't miss any videos in the future. I also invite you to check out my playlist of beekeeping videos and see what became of this mother colony. Thanks for watching.